Welcome to a Web of Stories. And today I'm going to talk about, excuse me, my nose is itchy. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subgenres. And it's a subgenre, but I'm not entirely sure what it's a sub of. So this genre is alternate historical fiction, which you would think it would be a subgenre of historical fiction, but lots of times I see it as like speculative fiction or sometimes science fiction. In fact, one of the books I'm going to share is very much science fiction. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And the reason I'm talking about that is that I have this book on my shelf to read, Farthing by Jo Walton. And the setting of this is that it's 8 years after World War II, and the Nazis won. And it's set in England. So I'm really interested to read this. I think this is, I've heard one of my bookish best friends recommended this a while ago, and she really enjoyed it. So I'm quite looking forward to reading it. Hopefully I'll get to it soon. I might put it on my high priority TBR for next month. But I wanted to talk about what I look for in alternate historical fiction and give a few recommendations, because the strange thing is, as much as I'm looking forward to reading this is actually the kind of historical fiction I don't really like. And let me explain. So the idea between historical fiction is like something in history went the other way, and this is what happened. This is what could have happened. Obviously, it's speculative in that way. As I said, I don't know if you would consider this under the historical fiction umbrella or under the speculative fiction umbrella, but there it is. So a lot of alternate historical fiction is like Farthing, where it's something big. The Nazis won World War II. The South won the Civil War. Don't even get me started on the American Royal series. I made it a page and a half into that book. But the United States has kings and queens. Big things like that. And that's fine. And I'm sure people really love them. I do know like American Royals is really popular. It's just not for me. But I prefer my historical fiction to be a little different. I like it when the conceit that the book uses is something minor that kind of changes the course of history as we know it. So let me give you some examples. The first one I'm going to talk about is a trilogy, and it is, I have heard this called the Boleyn Trilogy, the Anne Boleyn Trilogy, or the Boleyn King Trilogy. So in reality, in 1536, Anne Boleyn, who was Queen of England, she was married to Henry VIII. She had already given birth to her daughter, Elizabeth. In 1536, she had a stillborn birth of a son. This child was the fetus after it was stillborn. I'm not going to get too graphic, but it was obvious this was not a healthy pregnancy. Let's just put that. And that was sort of her downfall at that point. At that point, all of a sudden, King Henry's like, who already had taken up with Jane Seymour, it's like, she had an affair with her brother, and sent her to the Tower and off with her head. And that was the end of Anne Boleyn. I mean, I think most people know the story of Anne Boleyn. So the conceit of the Boleyn Trilogy, oh, by the way, this series is by Laura Andersen. The conceit of the Boleyn Trilogy is that child that was stillborn wasn't stillborn. It was a healthy child. And so this book begins with the death of Anne Boleyn, who in this book is an elderly woman, and she is the Dowager Queen, and her son is Henry IX, although he is called William in this book. So, Henry VIII only had two wives in this alternate universe. And Henry IX is very close to his older sister, Elizabeth. And then there's two other people. There's his friend Dominic, and there's Anne Boleyn's ward named Minuet. I think that's her name? Yes, Minuet. And so the four of them, William, Elizabeth, Dominic, and Minuet, go off and they have little adventures, and it's very much set in, so it's alternate history, but Laura Andersen does a really good job of rolling in the actual events of that period of time that these, and tries to fit it into this other situation where there's a king, and so there's still a lot of kind of like real history in this universe, and she does a fantastic job of putting it all together. And this trilogy does exactly what it needs to do. It ends perfectly. And the reason I say that is there's a follow-up trilogy, which I do not recommend. The follow-up trilogy, I read the first book, did not like it. DNF the second, never tried the third. But I really loved this Boleyn trilogy. I read it 10 years ago, and I I mean, I don't have a perfect memory of it, but I remember it a lot better, far better than I remember a lot of other books I read 10 years ago. And it just really captured, and I was reading it, it caught my imagination. And as I've said before, my degree is in medieval history, so I know about the Tudors. And I had to keep reminding myself, this is not real, because it was written so realistically. And she, even though it's alternate history, she still involved actual history in with it, that it just was seamless. So I highly recommend this series. The first book is called The Boleyn King. I have the list up here. Oops. The second book is called The Boleyn Deceit, and the final one is called The Boleyn Reckoning, and that is by Laura Andersen. So the next book I want to recommend is a little different. This book is the one that actually is science fiction, although it feels it's the beginning of a science fiction series. Let me put it that way, because this one, just because of what it is in the series, it does feel more historical. And the alternate history is not what you think it would be. So the way the story begins is there's like a scientist pilot. She's married to another scientist pilot, and this is in the about 40s, 50s. I can't remember, like 52 maybe. And they're off having a little romantic getaway, I think in the Adirondacks, I'm not sure. And something big happens, and they don't know what it is. I think maybe it's a nuclear bomb, all these things. But it's actually an asteroid that landed in the ocean off the coast of Washington, D.C., basically wiping off the whole east coast of the United States. They're far enough inland that they survive. And then from that, they realize because of this asteroid, it threw up a bunch of moisture in the air, which is going to change the temperature of the planet, very much like what some models around climate change are like, where it's going to get cold and then really, really hot and it won't be habitable anymore. So they realize they have to find different worlds. And this woman is part of the whole system. The capital moves to Kansas City, which I always thought was fun, of trying to find ways to get to other planets or another place to live, because Earth is going to become uninhabitable. So this first book feels very historical because we're setting things up. From what I understand, the books after this are more science fiction-y. So the asteroid is not the alternate history. That's not the alternate history part. It's not the little conceit. The conceit is, and it's very minor actually, if you're reading along, you realize she mentions at that point that the president is President Dewey. And I think, there's a very famous picture, the Dewey Defeats Truman picture, which was in 1948. It was a presidential election, and the polls, everyone thought that Dewey had defeated the incumbent President Truman. And so everyone went to bed thinking Dewey had won the election. And then the next morning when they woke up and votes were counted, they realized Truman really had, and there's a picture, I'll try to put it and stick it here. So that's Truman holding up laughing and holding up the picture saying Dewey defeats Truman when really he didn't. But the alternate history in this book is that Dewey did defeat Truman. Now, this book is by Robinette Kowal. I think I forgot to mention that. And I did read that the reason she did this is because she felt that Dewey was more pro-science than Truman was, which, great, that's a wonderful reason to do it. But I think in her doing this, and I don't know if she was aware she was doing this, or if this was even in her thought process, but the way it came off, at least to me, is this change signaled to me as the reader that I am in a different universe. Therefore, she can change things in her story that don't match up with what was really going on in the country at that time. So as I said, in the Boleyn series, the trilogy, the history is still kind of going on and it matches up what went on in reality, but you have some different players. The history is very different, and it's easy to accept because Mary Robinette Kowal made that decision. So we have differences in events, obviously, but also certain things like mental health is like, people understand that in this, which they did not in like 1952, not to the level that we do now, but they have a better understanding of that. You don't question it because it's a different universe. We already know that. It's different. So I think in this case, alternate history helped tell a story, and it became a tool that gave the author, Mary Robinette Kowal, freedom to really play in this new universe. And I really appreciated that. So the final book I want to talk about, boy, I have thoughts about this book. And generally I liked this book, but I have thoughts. And that is Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld. If you look at the cover, you know who this book's about. You know the total, you know who this book's about. It's about, the conceit of this book is that Hillary Rodham never married Bill Clinton. That is what happened if she didn't marry him. And it's very interesting. So I want to give a big trigger for this one first. There's two things I want to give a big trigger about. The first one, this book has Bill and Hillary's sex scenes in it. Reading them feels like you're walking in on your parents. Just know that's there. Like that, ooh, that was, I was like, ooh, that was kind of itchy to read. The second trigger is, I read this shortly when it came out, and I think I would feel better about it having read it now. Just some distance with things, but back to the book. So Bill and Hillary are together at one point in this book, and I think they're even engaged. But then something happens and Hillary decides to go her own way. So then we follow her. She becomes a professor, and then she becomes a senator from Illinois, not New York. And then she goes through all this. And then in 2016, she's running for president. And Bill comes back into the picture. And that's all I'm going to say, except to say that at the end, there was a decision that was made at the end. Whoa, that was, oh wow. I still don't know what I think of that decision that she made fictionally in this character. It was very unsettling and very mind-blowy to me, and that's why I can say I liked this book. I still don't know how much I liked this book because I'm still kind of thrown by that part, but I thought it was a well-written book. I think Curtis Sittenfeld did some interesting things. I still don't know how I feel about some of those things. Yeah, you could probably skip over the Bill and Hillary sex scenes though. But I liked the way she set this out because it was such a minor thing. She decided not to marry him. And then history changed, and there's at one point, Curtis Sittenfeld gives us a list of who the presidents have been. And it's not the way it was. So that's a fun one to read, but I do wish you issue caution with that one. You know, how strongly are the echoes of 2016 still, and 2017 and 2018 and 2019 and 2020 still echoing for you? I mean, just take stock for that for yourself before reading this one. But I thought it was a great way to do it. Just take one little thing and see how things changed. And I love it when historical fiction does that. So the thing is, historical fiction is not a huge subgenre. So I would love, if you guys know of any recommendations that you can offer to me, especially ones where they take such little things and just change them, please let me know in the comments below, because the only thing I have on the docket in this subgenre is this one, and I'd like to read more. So thank you very much. Please give me a thumbs up. Let me know if you have any recommendations. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.